All right, so let's get to the meat of what we're talking about tonight. I will tell you, as Charles said, what I'm covering tonight is basically and I've literally taught a 16-week course on this subject. So if it feels like I'm rushed or that I'm pushing a lot of information, or maybe you don't quite understand it, just know that this is generally a topic that we can have a college course on, and I have taught that. If you do have questions during the presentation, feel free to post it in the chat or stop me. Happy to absolutely want to take any of your questions. So tonight I'm going to go over a little bit of what is botany, what is horticulture, actually what is a plant, because sometimes we don't even know what a plant is. Why are plants important? Some of the plant biological processes that plants go through. The second part of tonight's talk, we're going to go over plant classification, plant taxonomy, plant naming, how plants are named. And then we will get into the last little bit, and we're going to discuss plant morphology, leaves, stems, flowers, fruits, and roots. That leads me to tell you too, if we had met in person, I was going to pass out a couple of handouts to you. Obviously, that is not the case. So I have shared a PDF file. This is actually a file that I share with a lot of, anytime I've taught plant morphology. Basically, it's similar to a dichotomous key, but it's a way to help you identify some plants based on how they look. So we'll look at those different characteristics. So feel free to download that. If you have, again, questions at all during the presentation, feel free to stop me or to post it in the chat. I'm happy to answer it. Okay. All right. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Just to give y'all a time, I should wrap up hopefully between 7 and 7:30. If you need to stop or we need to take a little break, let me know. So first off, what is botany? It is classified as the scientific study of classifying plants, the evolution of plants, and also the structure of plants. It includes the internal structure or the anatomy of a plant, as well as the external structures of a plant. And so that includes the morphology, the physiology, as well as its ecological uses. Botany is also known as plant sciences or plant biology. But again, it's the study of plants. Now, what is the difference between botany and horticulture? So horticulture in particular is not just the scientific study of horticulture, but it is the art and science of cultivating, of growing plants. And that includes both ornamental fruit and vegetables. Horticulture is classified or can be broken down into several types of horticulture. So you have pomology, which is, for example, your fruit and vegetable. Then we have floriculture, which is the study and the production of cut flowers or annual flowers for sale. And then, of course, we have our ornamental nursery production, which that's what my family and I grew up doing, was growing your trees and your shrubs and your perennials. And then last but not least, we have the landscape and landscape architecture side. So that's going to be installing the maintenance of horticulture. So we have, again, we have horticulture, which is that art and science. It's kind of it's actually under the umbrella of agriculture is what horticulture is, under the umbrella of agriculture. And then we have kind of 4 tracks, if you will. Matter of fact, at Auburn, we had actually, no, we had all 4. So you can do fruit and veg, you could have done landscape, or you could have done ornamental horticulture or landscape architecture. All right, what is a plant? I know most of you, if you're in this group, you probably know what a plant is, but just as a reminder, it is a photosynthetic, a multicellular organism that contains photosynthetic pigments called chlorophyll. So a plant makes its own food. It uses the sun and chlorophyll to make sugars, okay? And those sugars are then stored and they form a starch, or eventually can form a starch. This is obviously very different from ourselves. Ourselves, we actually have to ingest a food. We have to go out and hunt, kill, or fight people on 565 to get to the grocery store, if you're like me, to get food, okay? We don't make our own food, but plants do. Why are plants important? So several reasons. They're the first and foremost, they're the primary source of food for humans and animals. They play an essential role in producing oxygen. They keep us cool. That's one thing sometimes folks don't remember is actually by having trees and shrubs and a good landscape near your home, that's going to help with keeping your energy bills down in the summer and as well as in the winter. It's going to keep us cooler in the summertime and actually warmer in the wintertime. Plants renew air. Again, they help filter, many plants help filter the air. They provide a home for wildlife that includes our pollinators, our birds, and our mammals, and our insects. They also are great for beautification and the aesthetic value of plants. And of course, last but not least, they help with furnishing buildings material and creating fuel. All right, so some plant processes, and again, this might be a little bit of a review from either high school biology or college biology, but I just want to give us a really good background and basis. So some plant processes. These are some of the biological and physiological processes that plants go through. The first is photosynthesis. So I mentioned that plants make their own food. And this is that process, photosynthesis. It's the process of turning light, taking light energy from the sun, and then turning that energy into carbohydrates or into sugars. And then that can be transported and then stored by the plant as starch. Always like using the example of potato. Potatoes, if you've eaten a potato, you know that tuber is full of starches. To give you a little bit of more of a science background, you're taking, you're going to take CO2 and you're going to take water and you're going to take light, and then that is turned into sugars and also into oxygen. So plants, again, they'll take, you're going to have where sunlight penetrates the leaf. It also, you're going to have plants will take in carbon dioxide. They also take up water, but then they will produce or give off oxygen, and they make those sugars, that glucose, that C6H12O6, or the sugar. All right. All of this occurs in the foliage of a plant. So that's one reason we try to keep plants healthy. Is so that they will produce more oxygen and they will produce more sugars for us. And often this or photosynthesis only occurs in light. This does not occur in darkness, so it has to occur in light. Now, a process that occurs in the evening or can occur in both dark or light is called respiration. So this is when a plant will be gives off that oxygen, okay? So respiration is the process where carbohydrates are then broken down into energy that the plant can then be used. This is when that plant is using the food energy that it has stored, and the energy is then released into the atmosphere. In this process, oxygen is used, and then CO2 is then produced. right? Transpiration. So this is another one of those processes. So this is a process by which moisture is carried through the plant from the roots. So again, plants will take up water through their root system, and then it is transported throughout the stem and the foliage, and then it is actually released through the plant leaves through little tiny pores called stomata or stomates. This often will occur in the mornings, is when those stomata will open. Stomata are microscopic, so we can't see them with the naked eye, and they're often found on the back side of the leaf. So in the mornings, that's when our plants are probably the most perky. That's one reason we encourage to water in the mornings, is because those stomata are nice and open on the back side of the leaf. And then during the day, especially in the heat of the summer, they will end up closing. They will close those stomata because they don't want the water and the moisture to escape from those leaves. If you've ever noticed, and y'all living in Alabama, you've noticed probably your plants look really wilty by about 12 noon in August or July. And that's because that plant is trying to conserve its energy. So it's closed those stomata and it's kind of starting to shrivel a little bit. If it's happy and healthy, and especially in the mornings, the plant is going to be more awake, if you will, and it's going to look nice and happy. And that stomata is going to be not, and the stomata is going to be open. So some factors that increase transpiration or increase water loss, or that vaporization through the leaves, is going to be hot temperatures, very bright sunlight, low relative humidity, wind, and also moisture. Okay, so again, those are going to be factors that affect transpiration rates. The hotter it is, the lower the humidity, the faster moisture is going to be released. All right, any questions? Any questions so far? Okay, I'm gonna keep on rolling. All right, moving through, let's talk a little plant taxonomy. So plant taxonomy is the study of plant names and the identification of plants. There are plant taxonomists. These are the people who actually identify the plants and actually do the naming. Most gardeners, what you will need to know is the family and the genus and the species. Those tend to be the most relevant. However, again, just as a reminder, going back to your taxonomy and your basic classification of classification, we have the domain, kingdom, which we're in the kingdom Plantae. Then of course, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So those last bottom three, that's going to be the most specific, whereas domain is going to be the most broad when we're talking about the plant taxonomy or taxonomy and classification. Again, domain, kingdom, those are going to be very broad. Whereas when we get down to the family, genus, species, and eventually we get to a cultivar or a variety, that gets extremely specific. So some examples of plant taxonomy. Again, here we're in the kingdom Plantae or plant kingdom. We're in the division Spermatophylla, class Angiospermae. That means that the seeds are actually in the fruit. Order is Acilores, family Aceraceae, genus Acer, species Rubrum, which rubrum means red. And then variety or cultivar, in particular, this cultivar is October Glory. And when we are writing the genus and the species, when you're writing it, you always want to capitalize the genus and you want to write in lowercase the species. And you want to make sure that you underline the genus and the species. For a variety or a cultivar, you would want to put a single parentheses around the name. If we were to type the genus and the species, you would also make sure that you capitalize the genus, lowercase the species, but you want to italicize. I treat it often like a book. If you can remember that, if you treat it like a book title, where you capitalize the genus and you write the species or specific epithet in lowercase. And your variety or cultivar, if it was the cultivar, you would put that in quotations, single quotations. If it was actually a variety, that is going to, you would write the word var, VAR, as you can see on the screen, and then period. All right, so who came up with how plants are named? Who actually came up with this crazy system? So this gentleman was Carolus Linnaeus. Carolus Linnaeus. He lived in the 1700s. He was a Swedish botanist that created this binomial system or a two-name system for naming plants. I've already kind of covered this, so that you have the genus and the species or the specific epithet. That's always going to be the second name. And of course, the cultivar or variety. Now, I want to touch a little bit on the difference between cultivar and variety. So a cultivar is one that has been a plant that has been cultivated. So intentionally has been bred for either a beautiful flower. Maybe it's been bred for sweet fruit. Maybe it's been bred for size, shape, for when it blooms, cold hardiness. That is basically, I would consider more man-made. That's a cultivar. So, and again, they're going to be written, if you see a cultivar, it's going to have that single quotations around it. Again, October glory, that would be a cultivar. A variety, on the other hand, is typically found naturally or in nature. And usually it has been the product of evolution and through a plant adapting to a certain climate. So I always give this example. We have a lot of different types of oaks here in the Southeast, but they also have oak trees in the Northwest and in the Midwest. Our oak trees here in the Southeast obviously have adapted to more cold tolerant, or not cold tolerant, heat tolerant climate versus the counterpart in the Midwest or Northeast. So in some of those cases, you will have a variety that is more adapted to those temperatures. Does that make sense? If I can get a thumbs up, or if anybody has a question about the difference between cultivar and variety. Okay. All right. So another good example of that is going to be the Prunus persica. And the variety is going to be, and I'm going to butcher the name, it's Nuka persica, which is the variety nectarine. Right, a little bit more. Plants can be named after a person, place, or maybe even a description of the plant. For example, Butula lutea is yellow birch. Lutea, for example, is yellow, or is the Latin term for yellow. So you'll see lutea. Quercus virginiana is live oak. And then we have, for example, Magnolia macrophylla. So macrophylla meaning has a large leaf, or macrophylla means big leaf. Magnolia grandiflora means grand flower, for example. All right, a little bit more on plant taxonomy, and I might have gone into too much into this, but not only are plants divided into the kingdom plantae, but they can also be either the algae, such as thallophytes, bryophytes, or bryophyta are considered your mosses and your liverworts. Pteridophytes are your ferns. A lot of people actually think that ferns are like our angiosperms. They are not. They are in their own classification. And then, of course, we get to our big spermatophytes. So that means that they are seed-bearing plants. They have roots, they have stems, and they also have a vascular system. Those are going to be spermatophytes. That's mostly everything else. Now, within spermatophytes, we can then break them into either gymnosperms or angiosperms. So gymnosperm means that the seed is naked, so they often will have a narrow leaf plant. This can be, for example, palm, your cycads, and pines. That means that seed does not have a covering all over it. And then we have angiosperms. So that means that we have plants that are their seed is actually covered by a shell. Think of like a pecan, if you will. If you've ever cracked a pecan nut, you know that it's got that shell around it. Often these are our broad-leafed plants. So this can include everything from an oak, daisy, basil, boxwood, anything in between. Now within angiosperms, so we've gone from big taxonomy to kingdom plantae. We've gone down to our spermatophytes. Then we've gone to gymnosperms or angiosperms. Now we're going to look inside angiosperms. A division within a subdivision within angiosperms. They can be either classified as either monocot or dicot. Monocot or dicot. So a monocot. And this helps when you're trying to identify a plant. So I go through all of this to tell you this helps when you're trying to identify a plant. If you can get it to where it's either a spermatophyte and then an or spermatophyte and then to a gymnosperm or angiosperm, then you can get it to a monocot or a dicot, you're in good shape. Monocots are plants that have one cotyledon or seed leaf. So when they pop up or when they start to germinate, they're only going to have one little leaf to it. Typically, a monocot is going to have parallel venation. So when you look at the foliage, it's going to have that parallel leaves. Can anybody tell me, you can post it in the chat, of a plant that has parallel leaf venation? Anything. It doesn't have to be necessarily native, but anything that has parallel venation. Secondly, yes, irises. Yeah, they would be classified as a monocot. Then we have vascular bundles. So those are actually, if you were to take the stem and you were to take the stem and look at under the microscope, those vascular bundles or where the xylem and the phloem flow through the plant, they would actually be in a nice, they would be scattered. Usually they're in a scattered arrangement. Often too, monocots have a fibrous root system. So if I'm coming from it from a landscaper standpoint, a lot of times monocots are easier to control because they don't have that really deep taproot system. They're much easier to grasp. And then last but not least, their floral parts are often in multiple of 3. So if you were to look at the flowers, you would notice it would be in whorls of 3 or 3 different parts. All right, let me look at the chat. Let's see what else we had. So orchids, corn, that's a really good example. Now, their counterpart, dicots, that's going to be pretty much everything else. When the dicot produces starts to germinate, it's going to have 2 cotyledons or seed leaves. So when it pops up, you're going to see 2 little seed leaves that kind of pop up. Typically, they will have net venation. They're vascular bundles. So again, if you were to take the stem of that plant and chop the stem and then place it underneath the microscope, you would notice that their vascular bundle would be arranged in a circle. So I'm sure you have seen it. If you've ever looked at a tree stump after it's been cut down, you would notice those tree rings, and that's actually those vascular bundles that you can visibly see. But that's some of those vascular bundles that you can, do you notice that it's in a nice, circular pattern. Often too, your dicots are going to have a taproot system, and then their floral parts are going to be in multiples of either 4 or 5. All right. So again, just to kind of review a little bit. So we had a question from Lynn. Since monocots have fibrous root systems, they would be best for controlling erosion. Yes, that is true, Lynn. Now there are some dicots that have that can be used for controlling erosion as well. But yes, that would be a correct answer. Yep, a lot of monocots can be used for erosion control. So to go to kind of to review back one more time. So in the plant kingdom, we have, I'm going to go back a little bit. In this plant kingdom, we have spermatophytes. Yep, grasses, those are great. Spermatophytes, those are the seed producing plants. Within spermatophytes, we get gymnosperm and angiosperm. Gymnosperm produces a naked seed. So that's a good example if that's going to be your pine trees. Angiosperm are going to be seed plants that actually have a seed covering. Within angiosperms, the way we can break it down to either monocot or a dicot. Okay, monocots being plants that have parallel leaf venation, one seed cotyledon, vascular bundles are scattered, and often a fibrous root system, and flowers parts that are in multiples of 3. Dicot, when it germinates, you have 2 cotyledons or seed leaves. So when they start to germinate, you'll see 2 little seed leaves. Net venation, vascular bundles are going to be arranged in a ring. So remember that. Think tree ring. Then they often will have a taproot system, and then their flower parts are going to be in multiples of either 4 or 5. All right. All right, so what are some other ways that we can classify plants? All right, so in the horticulture world, we can classify them primarily in the horticulture industry. We'll classify them by not only their taxonomic classification. For botany, they truly do that. Botanists and plant taxonomists, they try to stay very close to the plant taxonomy. But in the horticulture industry, we can classify plants by their life cycle. So whether they're an annual, a biennial, or perennial, by their life stage. So whether they're embryonic, juvenile, transitional, where they're in their reproductive stage, dormancy stage, or maybe even senescence, maybe they died. We can also classify plants based on their hardiness zone or their latitude. So where they are typically found. For us here in North Alabama, we would classify ourselves in a temperate hardiness zone or a temperate climate, and we would be in hardiness zone 7A, 7B. That actually has recently changed. So I would encourage you, if you haven't done so, go to the USDA website and check out your hardiness zone because it might have changed. How the fruit usage of that plant, you can classify plants in that manner. So whether it's for medicinal purposes, whether it's for ornamental purposes, fruit, vegetable, how it's used, and then how it's grown. Is it a warm season or a cool season plant? Is it great for wet season? Is it also, or is it for does well in dry conditions? For, like, say, for example, a xeriscape garden or landscape. So again, how it's grown or how it grows and reacts to the environment. All right, any questions? Again, any questions about what I've gone through so far? I hate that we are not in person because I'm actually a fairly animated person and I like to ask lots of questions when I'm doing a lecture. Any questions before I continue and talk a little about the different plant parts?
Hey, Jane, I've got one comment or maybe question to the group. So the previous slide on monocots and dicots, I'm glad you spent a lot of time there. Does anyone not understand that after the explanation? Or is there anything that's not clear to anyone on here? And don't feel afraid, to answer that question honestly. It's so important and it's very easy to distinguish the two. It's very helpful in identification.
I think it's for someone novice like me, I think it's probably easier. I understand it in concept, but actually the application of applying what I've learned is something I have to practice and sort of do. So looking back at things I've seen, I think, oh yeah, that makes sense. That belongs to that. But anyway, so I'm gonna unmute myself.
We'll practice that in the field when we do
Yeah.
our next.
Yeah, I would encourage to practice that. So one big key, especially for plants that are, well, I would consider an adult plant, look at that leaf. It's going to be really important to look. One of the easiest and quickest ways to identify if it's a monocot or a dicot is by the foliage. Does it have parallel veination or does it have that net veination? I like to also think about ourselves. Vascular bundles, and I mentioned that before. I often like to think they're almost like the veins of a plant. We have blood pumping through our veins, but in plants, they have xylem and phloem pumping through them. So looking at that veination and how it looks on a plant, you're going to be able to tell if it's a monocot or a dicot, just looking at that veination. All right. Yes, Laura, yes, I can send these out to Charles afterwards. And it is being recorded, so I think you'll be able to look at it again. All right. Any further questions? If I'm going too fast, let me know. All right, so some 5 basic parts of a plant. Leaves, stems, flowers, fruit, and roots. And I'm going to go over all of these. Now, just as a reminder, I would normally in a class, I would take almost a whole lecture period and talk about each of these. So that'd be almost 5 weeks worth of going over nothing but just these plant parts. So just bear with me. We're touching on, I'm trying to jam as much information as I can into one session. All right, so first we're going to look at our leaves. Their function. What is their function and the primary purpose? Now, we've already mentioned photosynthesis and that process where the plant is trying, or we have sunlight and carbon dioxide going into the plant. The sunlight is penetrating down through the leaves and foliage of the plant, hitting the chlorophyll, and that is going to make our sugars or our glucose. Their function is to absorb sunlight. Second function, okay, is to produce and to conduct photosynthesis. Okay, again, that production of sugars. Third, gas exchange. I mentioned the process called transpiration. Okay, so that's when they are releasing, they're absorbing that CO2 and releasing oxygen. They're also releasing moisture. So that's again through those processes called transpiration and respiration. Okay. A plant is going to respire when it releases oxygen. It's going to transpire when it's releasing moisture. Transpiration is again that loss of water, and it occurs most often when we have high temperatures and low relative humidity and very bright light. Another function of our foliage, our leaves, is to store photosynthates. Again, that creation of sugars and that eventual creation of starches for the plant to use. In some plants, leaves have been modified for the environment based on where they are. So for example, some leaves have turned into, been modified into tendrils. So those leaves actually are used for climbing. For other plants, they have developed spines. I think of cacti. They have developed spines for protection. Others have developed what we call bracts and that's actually used for attracting our pollinators. One of the best examples of a bract would be a poinsettia. Now, a lot of folks like to think of a poinsettia, and we're just coming out of the Christmas and holiday season, and that beautiful part of the poinsettia, whether it's yellow, white, pink, or red, that is actually called a bract. That is not the flower. The flower is actually very tiny and inside the bract. And that bract is is actually a modified leaf that's there to attract the foliage or attract your pollinators. I'm sorry, excuse me. Another example of a bract, dogwoods. Here in the Southeast, we love dogwoods. Dogwoods are an excellent native tree. And matter of fact, they'll be producing soon, hopefully. I know it's hard to believe, but they will be producing those bracts. And they'll either come in a white, pink, purple, or mauve color. And that's there to attract those pollinators. All right, a little bit more about leaf morphology. All right, so let's talk about the parts of a leaf. The blade is going to be the flattened, expanded part of the plant, or of the plant, or of the leaf, that blade. Then we have what's known as the petiole. Okay, and the petiole is basically like a mini stem. I always like to call it the mini stem, and that actually is what attaches itself to the stem. Now, some plants will have a petiole and some plants don't have a petiole. So that's important to remember. When you're trying to identify a plant, one of the first things you can do is look at the blade and you look at the petiole. And that important about the blade is going to come up here in just a minute. Also, some plants have what we call a stipule and some don't. Stipules often are found right at the very base of a petiole. And they're like little even like mini leaves, if you will. They're leaf-like appendages at the base of a petiole. Then we have the tip or the apex, okay, and that's going to be the very top part of the leaf. And then, of course, the base of the leaf. I don't know if I can use a pointer. Let me see if I can use a little pointer. Let me see if I can annotate. I like using that. Okay. This right here, okay, that right there, that is going to be your base of your leaf. And then up here is going to be your apex, okay, the tip. Different plants will have different bases. Some will have very pointy or sharp tips or apexes. Others might have blunted or even rounded apexes. Okay, let me see if I can erase that now. Let me see if I can erase. Whoops, I might have missed. There we go. Then we have plants that have a margin, okay, and that's important. If you take anything else, there's a lot of little tidbits from tonight, but one way we identify, or one of the quickest ways to identify a plant is by its leaf margin. And that's going to be the edge, okay? That's the edge of this, leaf. Then we have the midrib. That's that mid vein, if you will. Some plants have a very prominent central mid vein, others do not. If you were to take the back of a leaf and you'll see the mid vein, sometimes they will actually poke up above the blade of the plant. And then, of course, last but not least, we'll have secondary or lateral veins. Again, plants are a lot like people. This one right here, this particular leaf right here, has that net veination, and it has those secondary lateral veins. So let me make sure that I want to make sure that y'all can see that. I'm going to get my pointer again. So right here, whoop, that right there, that's that mid vein. Okay, that's the central vein. And again, it can either be prominent, aka sticking up out of the plant, or it cannot be. Then we have our lateral veins, okay, right here. These are the lateral veins, okay, or secondary veins, right? And all through those veins, you're going to have xylem and phloem, okay? Sugars and water are going to be pumping to those leaves. All right, let me leave and drawing. There we go. All right, any questions? Any questions? Give you a minute.
I have a question. Do stipules have any function that you're aware of? Those little tiny
So
leaves?
their primary function, or what they would be considered function, is actually for protection of the foliage before it has emerged out of the plant or emerged off of the stem. That is their only function. And like I said, some plants have stipules, a lot of them don't. You'll in one way, the one reason that I even mention them is for identification purposes. If you're trying to identify a plant, sometimes you'll see them. If you don't see them, it's an easy way to help you with identification. But yes, their primary function was actually for protecting the new baby leaf that's going to emerge. Okay, what's the difference between a bract and the petals on a flower? So really good question, April. So bracts are actually the modified leaves. So they actually can do photosynthesis, believe it or not. Petals on a flower, they still actually both have the same function though on a plant. So bracts still conduct photosynthesis, or can conduct photosynthesis, but both of their functions are to attract pollinators. And then Lynn asked, are stipules more common in the spring? It can be, actually, yes. I have seen plants that are in the wintertime or even in the fall with stipules, but stipules can, a lot of times, are probably more prominent actually in the spring. Just because we're coming out of the wintertime and they're going to be more trying to protect that new foliage. Great questions, guys. So I want to talk a little bit about some common leaf arrangements. I'm going to try to knock this off. Common leaf arrangements. So first off, what is leaf arrangement? Why is it important? So a leaf arrangement is basically the placement of a leaf on the stem. And the arrangement at the node of a plant. So a node is that point of attachment where the stem and the leaf or the petiole leaf. Now, so for example, let me get my pointer again. Again, I kind of hate that we're not meeting in person, because I usually always bring examples. All right, so right here, this spot right here, that's considered the node of a plant. And as you can see, it's got a little petiole, again, that mini stem, okay? That point of attachment, that's called the node. And some of our most common arrangements include alternate, okay? So it looks almost like a stair step. Opposite, where there's be 2 leaves per node, okay? Or whorl, that means that there are 3 or more leaves per node. And often those whorled, it almost looks like it's in a circular pattern, if you will. All right, that's no problem. All right, so again, we have some of the most common are going to be alternate, opposite, and whorled. There are some other types of leaf arrangements, but the ones that we most often see in the plant world, in the horticulture world, are going to be alternate, opposite, and whorled. Again, Alternate means that they're going to have that stair step appearance to it. Opposite means that you're going to have leaves and nodes that are quite literally opposite of each other. And then whorled means that they have 3 leaves or more that go around the stem. And again, it looks almost as a circular pattern. Some good examples, and I often get this question, what's a good example of a whorled arrangement? If you know what the plant horse mint is, or a lot of plants in the Lamiaceae family or the mint family, have often a whorled arrangement or can have a whorled arrangement to them. All right, moving on. All right. Leaves can be either simple or compound. And this can be a bit of a tricky concept for folks. I will just be quite honest. When we have a simple leaf, this means that you have a single leaf blade, a single leaf with a single petiole, one petiole. Now this particular leaf, okay, this right here is going to be your example, that first on the left-hand side, if you're looking at your screen. That's a good example of a simple leaf. Second type of leaf is what we call a compound leaf. That's when you have 3 or more leaflets or mini leaves that are attached to a single petiole. I hope I haven't lost you at this point. Not only do we have leaves that are compound, but they can be bipinnately compound or even tripinnately compound. Probably some of the best examples of bi and tripinnately compound plants. If you know the plant Nandina, it's a big invasive for us here in Alabama. And it is often classified as bipinnately compound. So it's going to be a compound leaf. Tripinnately compound, many of our ferns can be tripinnately compound, and also many of our tropicals are tripinnately compound. So again, they have 3 or more leaflets attached to that single petiole. All right, leaf shape. This is really important. Again, trying to identify a plant based off of its leaf shape. There's many types of leaf shapes, and I do want to reference again the PDF that I put in the chat. If you need me to send you a copy, I'm happy to do so. This takes a lot of practice, is learning those leaf shapes, and I will throw out, maybe y'all have an activity there, and I can send it. I'll send it to you, Charles, where you go out and have a scavenger hunt, and you try to find all the different types of leaf shapes. And then try to identify them. So find different types of leaf shapes, and then we try to come back together and you try to identify them. There are many types. Oval, there's oval, needle, cordate, or heart-shaped. One of the best examples of cordate would be the eastern redbud. Then we have ovate, rounded, spatulate, that almost looks like a spoon, lanceolate, linear, would be very skinny, lobed. That means a lot of your oak trees are going to be lobed, so they actually have the indentions. Pinnate or palmate. Palmate's going to be, again, think of your palm. Again, there are lots and lots of different shapes of leaves. If you go to the very, very top, I think it should be at the very, very top in the chat. If not, I'll resend it out. Okay, I'll resend that out. Thank y'all. I'll send it out before the end. All right. All right. Another thing to look at is the leaf margin. So remember, the margin is that edge of the leaf. And there are different types of leaf margins. This again helps us with identifying a plant. Ciliate means that it's got fine hairs or it's hairy. Another term for ciliate or plants, you may have them characteristic as called pubescence. So you may, if it's hairy, you'll have ciliate or pubescence on there. Crenate means it has rounded teeth. For example, white oaks very commonly have a crenate margin. Dentate look like little teeth. Double serrated or doubly serrated is where they're going to have very sharp teeth. Often it's very forward pointing. Then we have cellulate, sinuate, spiny. A good example of spiny would be like holly plants. And then of course undulated means that they have a wide wavy margin. A lot of times you'll see where some plants are particular, like a willow oak, you'll see where the leaf kind of does almost like a wave, if you will. It doesn't have quite that nice straight look to it, but it'll have an undulated mark. So again, I highly encourage for doing a fun maybe activity to go out into the woods or to your backyard. Maybe not today because it's really cold, but to go out and look at the foliage and try to identify the leaf margin. Is it a simple leaf? What shape of leaf is it? And again, that's going to help you with identifying a plant. All right, stem. Any questions actually before I move on to stems? Any questions about leaves? Okay. All right, stems. Let's look at their function. I'm looking at my time. Okay, their function. So they are a conductant. They basically, if you are thinking of comparing them to humans, I mean, this is where they help conduct xylem and phloem, much like our veins and heart. They try to kind of pumps blood to our extremities. Well, a stem, its function is to pump xylem and phloem to the extremities of a plant. Their other purpose is to support and elevate leaves, flowers, and fruit. They also act as a storage unit, if you will. They can store water, they store carbohydrates. They also can play a role in photosynthesis. For example, a lot of our cacti, they can, in some cases, conduct gas exchange through lenticels. That's mostly in some of our woody trees and shrubs. Lenticels are present. And then we have plant defense. They can often will have thorns on them. If you have never been pricked by a thorn on a stem, on a holly bush, or even on you're talking about that winterberry, it actually on its stems, it has will have those thorns on the stem. All right, a little bit about some stem morphology. So this is the parts of a stem. Again, you have the first thing is what we consider the terminal bud, and that's the top end of the stem. Oftentimes the terminal bud is where and not that the auxiliary buds aren't important, but if you're trying to propagate, if you're trying to force new growth on a plant, that's where that new growth, a lot of the new growth is going to be occurring, is on the terminal or on the end of the bud. Auxiliary buds are also known as lateral buds. Those occur on the sides of the stem, okay? Now terminal buds, and there's actually a couple of different types of buds. We have both vegetative buds and we have fruiting buds or reproductive buds. So vegetative is where you're going to have new shoot growth or new stem growth, that vegetation. And then we have reproductive, or where your flower and your fruit are going to produce, okay? So when you're looking at a plant, it's very important to try to determine, is that a terminal, is that a vegetative bud, or is that a flowering bud? One that comes to mind, if you don't know the plant, I highly recommend you looking at it. The star magnolia And I know it's not another one is, I know it's not a native, but the Jayne magnolia, and my name's Jayne, so I really like that plant. But they will actually put on flower in the early spring before they put on vegetative growth. So when you're trying to identify a plant, looking at those buds is going to be really important. If it's terminal bud or if it's an auxiliary bud. If you see where the plant often it's very hairy, if you look at the buds, they'll be kind of hairy. A lot of times that's going to be a reproductive bud. So if you see it where it's very pubescent or hairy, a lot of times that's a reproductive bud. If it is more waxy, shiny, slick, a lot of times that's going to be a vegetative bud. So that's going to be one that's trying to put on new either a new stem or even trying to put on foliage, if you will. So just a reminder, that node, I probably spent a little too much time on buds, but the node is the area of attachment where that leaf occurs. And some plants have a petiole, some plants don't. Remember, that petiole is that little mini stem, and that's that little mini point of attachment, that point of attachment where the leaf and the stem meet. The internode is actually the space in between the nodes. So I'm going to get my pointer out and kind of go over this with you guys. So right here, this portion right here, that's what we call an internode, the space in between a node. Remember this right here, that's that point of attachment of the petiole and the leaf to the stem, the node. And remember, some plants have a petiole, some don't. And then we have the auxiliary bud, that's the side buds. And then we have a terminal bud. And buds can either be vegetative, so they're going to be helping the plant produce more stem and foliage growth, or they can be reproductive buds. And that's where they're going to be producing flower and eventually fruit, hopefully. Hairy, a lot of times the hairy buds or pubescent buds are often going to be reproductive. And I think my example of either the Jayne magnolia or the star magnolia. And those are actually going to be hopefully blooming here in the next week or so, or not weeks, a couple of weeks or so. Hoping. Yes, and that's true. I'm glad you brought that up. Right now is a really good time to be looking at buds, and actually the beginning of late winter, beginning of spring is a really good time to actually look and identify the leaf scar and also the where the leaf used to be, and also finding the buds. Great point. All right, give me one moment. Right, inside the stem. Okay, so I've mentioned before about phloem and xylem. So xylem and phloem, I always like to consider that they're almost like the blood for the plant. So phloem conducts photosynthetic products bidirectionally. So in other words, you've got oftentimes it is bringing sugars either both upward and downward through the stem. Xylem, on the other hand, only goes upward. So it's bringing up water and bringing up minerals from the soil and from, if you fertilized, bringing up water and minerals up through the plant. And that xylem and phloem goes hopefully all through that plant, through the stem, and then eventually to the foliage. And again, phloem is going to go bidirectionally, so it's going to go upward and downward through the stem, whereas xylem only moves upward. Okay, xylem is going to be bringing water and minerals, whereas phloem is actually going to be bringing your sugars and starches through the plant. And then both tissues are then produced by the vascular cambium. And again, that's found in the inside the plants. If you were to take, and this might be a fun lab for you guys to do if you have access to it, but taking a look at leaves and stems underneath the microscope. And you can define those vascular bundles and the vascular cambium layer of a plant. Right, a little bit more about some modified stems. I mentioned earlier about modified leaves, but there actually can be modified stems as well. Bulbs are a great example of a modified stem. So they are basically large buds that are actually surrounded by fleshy leaves with a small stem at the lower end. Their purpose is to store food. Some good examples of bulbs include your onions, your lilies, hyacinths, tulips, garlic. Those are all examples of a modified stem. Second type is going to be a rhizome. Rhizomes are horizontal stems that grow just below the ground surface. They often they have little short internodes. So remember, internodes are the space in between the nodes. They'll often be very, very short. Plants that have rhizomes include irises, many of our ornamental grasses, ferns. Probably the one that actually gives us the most issues would be Bermuda grass. Bermuda grass, I love it when it's a turf grass. However, it can be very invasive when it comes to a vegetable garden or a landscape and you don't want it there. It has very aggressive rhizomes. So rhizomes, again, run underground. Often too, for example, and this is just a little add-on, some plants have what we call a stolon, and stolons run above ground. So rhizomes run underground, stolons run above ground. Where are the roots on bulb? Okay, so if you were, thank you, April. So if you were to take a bulb and you know the little part, if you took the, I was just chopping up an onion. I should go grab one. If you were to take that onion and you saw the little, there's some little hairs that are at the bottom of the onion, that's actually the root of that onion. So you could plant that at the very base if I had the onion. That's the little root system. For a rhizome, right here, I'm going to get my pointer. Okay, so right here, you've got these right here. These are your rhizomes. A lot of times, I often think of the plant agapanthus, if you're familiar with it. Agapanthus, these are the rhizomes, but a lot of times in rhizomes and the roots actually will kind of be intermingled with each other a lot of times. And if I'm propagating or I'm separating and dividing them, a lot of times I can chop those rhizomes and I treat them a lot like my roots. I don't know if that completely answered your question, but
what you circled there, is that you're saying that's the rhizome or the root?
That's the rhizome. Mm-hmm. That's the rhizome right there. Okay, a couple more modified stems. We have runners. These are not found on all plants, but many of our bramble fruits have runners. Strawberries, for example, these are horizontal stems that run above ground. So these are another word or another term for runners would be a stolon. You've heard me use that. So runners or stolons. These are stems that run above ground and run parallel often to the ground. Again, to use the example of Bermuda grass actually, one reason it's so aggressive is because it produces both stolons or runners and it produces rhizomes. Tubers, okay, those are swollen, fleshy underground stems. Potatoes are going to be one of our best examples. Those are swollen, fleshy underground stems that contain starch. Their main purpose is to store food and starches. If you are trying to reproduce, or if and I know I'm kind of I hope I don't offend anyone, but we are right now, you know, we're here in the cold weather. If I was trying to, if I got in really bad shape, I could actually reproduce or propagate using the eye of a potato. Those are actually the nodes. And then coming out of that potato, you see this right here. That's actually that new little stem that's trying to, and leaves that are trying to poke out. But this right here, this is part of that stem, and it's trying to create a new plant. So you could take that little eyes potato, plant that, and then you'd have new potato trying to popping through the soil. So again, those are all modified stems. Couple more, and I've got some stolons, samples of stolons. Again, stolons, like runners, they are produced above ground, and they tend to grow in all different types of directions. Cladophylls, often found on cacti. They are basically flattened leaf-like stems. Remember, I mentioned that sometimes stems can be spiny, but those cladophylls, oftentimes we think these are the foliage, but that's actually a stem of the plant. Oops, you go back. Last but not least, we've got tendrils. So plants have modified their stem and their foliage to are modified leaves, again, for climbing. And they have for climbing, and actually great for climbing on vines. These right here, this is an example of a tendril. Okay. If any of you are familiar with the pea plant, or if you are familiar, some of our climbing roses have tendrils. One that's more invasive, it would be like our, oh my gosh, name is, I can see the plant, but the name is mistaking me. Anyway, the tendrils basically will wrap their little modified leaves, and they're used for climbing onto that plant. All right, flowers. All right, flowers. Check my time. Flower functions. The main function is to attract pollinators. Second function is for reproduction. So a plant will produce a flower, and then from that flower, if it is fertilized by hopefully our pollinators, we will then eventually get a fruit. Flowers, they can be broken down into 3 different life cycles. We have annuals, we have biennials, and we have perennials. Annuals complete their life cycle within 1 growing season. So they will produce, they will grow vegetatively, they produce flower, and they go into their reproductive stage, and then they die, all within 1 growing season. Annuals can be either warm season or cool season. Here in Alabama, because we have 4 seasons, or we have all 4 seasons, we can have fall, spring, winter, and summer annuals. Second type of life cycle is going to be our biennials. So these are plants that grow from seed and goes into its reproductive phase and then dies within 2 growing seasons. Often they will live for 2 years. Some of the best examples are going to be plants that are in our Brassicaceae family, like our broccoli family. They are going to be excellent examples of biennials. And then third, we have perennials. That's pretty much everything else. Perennials can be either classic flowers, they can also be shrubs, and they can be trees. these are plants that grow for many seasons before flowering, or they will actually flower each year. Oftentimes, they will go through a season, they will grow vegetatively, they put on flower, they put on fruit, and then they will go dormant during either the most harshest time period of the season. So, for example, I moved here from California. Many of those plants, their harshest season out in the desert is going to be in the summertime. So they're a little bit different. They live in more of a dry desert conditions. So their reproductive phase and their flower phase is actually winter and spring, and then they go into senescence or dormancy in the summertime. For us here in Alabama, in perennials in particular, most of our perennials are going to go into reproductive phase in the spring. In the late spring, they may go into flower. In summer and late summer and early fall, they'll go into a fruit phase, and then in late fall and winter, they go dormant. So that, again, that's the difference between annuals, biennials, and perennials. So annuals live for one growing season. Biennials will live for 2 growing seasons or 2 years, and then perennials can live for many, many years, and they go through many cycles throughout their lifespan. All right, I'm going to move a little bit faster just to kind of go through because I know time is short. Flowers are broken into 3 classes. Monoecious. Monoecious means a single house, meaning that flowers are male and female. There's only a single individual on there. Second type of class is what we call bisexual or hermaphroditic. So the flower has both the male and the female part on it. This is often known as a perfect flower. And then we have flowers that are considered dioecious. So that means that you have, or double house, means that the male flowers are on one plant and female flowers are on another plant. Now, not to confuse you a whole lot, but I love this graphic right here. So if it's dioecious, you've got the male flower and the female flower. Mom and dad are separated. Okay, they are divorced. We have dioecious. Male and female are separate. If they are monoecious, that means mom and dad live together. Okay, you've got both male and female flowers. You've got male and female flowers separate, but they're on the same plant. And if a plant is hermaphroditic or bisexual, it's going to have both male and female flower parts on the same flower. Okay. So again, I hope that doesn't confuse you a whole lot. But you can have dioecious, monoecious, or bisexual or hermaphroditic. Now, a complete flower. Again, this would be a great lab for you guys, is looking at the different types of flowers. A complete flower has all the parts of the flower. So it's got the male flower part, it's got the female flower part, it's got the petals, it's got everything. An incomplete flower is when it's actually missing a part of the flower. So maybe, for example, this a dioecious. If it's dioecious, oftentimes it will be considered incomplete. So it's missing either the male or missing the female part. So again, one way to help identify a plant is looking at its flower morphology and looking at those parts of the flower. All right, speaking of parts of a flower, flower parts are often arranged in what we call a whorl or in a circular arrangement. So I always like to kind of start with the work from the outside and work my way in to the flower. Okay, so the sepal or the calyx. So like the stipules, if you think back, stipules are where that protective part of the foliage. Sepals perform the same function. They protect the new flower that's going to emerge. That's their function. When it's together, or there's often two of them, or can be multiples, it's called a calyx. So it's again, it's that mini little leaf that you'll find at the base of a flower, and some plants have it, some don't. Then we have what's known as the petals, or in scientific term, collectively, it's known as a corolla. And one way I remember that is a colorful Toyota Corolla. Their purpose, the petals' purpose is to attract pollinators. That's their primary purpose. For us as humans, we want them aesthetically as pleasing, the flowers aesthetically as pleasing as possible. So this is where you get into hybridization and trying to breed for the best corolla or petals. Perianth is the sepals and the petals combined. Then we go into the next stage, which is called the male part of the plant, or male part of the flower. It's called the stamen. And the way I remember that is the word men is in the word. The stamen is made up of the anther and filament. So anther is where the male pollen is produced, that tip part. Often too, if it's where if you were to sneeze in the springtime, it's where all the pollen is produced. And the filament is often like a little string that attaches to the flower. Okay, so you have the top part, which is the anther. That's where all the pollen grains are. And then the filament basically just attaches, helps that anther attach to the flower. The female part is known as the pistil, female part. And the reason how I can remember that is always remember Annie has her gun. She's got her pistol. Annie has her pistols. And it's made up of the stigma, style, and the ovary. The stigma is going to be the top part. Oftentimes this is sticky, and the reason it's sticky is because it's where the pollen is able to attach itself to the pistil. Okay, often those pollen is flying through the air, and that's where it can be sticky and actually stick. And then the style is basically a tube where pollen can go down the flower. And then at the base of the flower, you have the ovary. And that is where the eggs of the flower are held. And then the very base of the plant is known as the receptacle. And that's actually the little swollen part of the tip the very base of the flower. So again, we've kind of gone from the outer part of the flower all the way toward the inner parts of the flower. So again, I apologize. I'm going to move a little bit faster just so we can get through. Flowers can be classified as either solitary or grouped. So solitary flowers is a single flower produced at the end of a peduncle or receptacle, if you will. Sometimes the flowers can also be grouped or have multiple flowers on a peduncle, if you will. What we call the inflorescence is basically the arrangement of the flowers. And if it is a grouped flower, they can be either branched or unbranched. Some can actually be sessile or unstalked, while others actually have a little stem, if you will. Some common types of floral arrangement or inflorescence, so that's solitary or single. Others include spike, raceme, corum, umbel, cyme, panicle, spadix, or a single ray and disc flower. Again, I want to mention in the handout that I've given you guys, I've listed some of the common inflorescences. So again, that's the arrangement of the flowers and how they look. Also with flowers, with their inflorescence, they can either be determinate or indeterminate. So determinate means when those flowers, basically is when the flowers are blooming. So they either bloom on the terminal, or if you recall, terminal means that very tip end, or the tip end blooms first. That actually will halt elongation. Or they can be indeterminate. So that's when actually the lower flowers actually will bloom. So either at the tip, very top, or they'll be, if they're indeterminate, they bloom from bottom to top. So determinate means top, they'll bloom from top to bottom. Indeterminate means that they will bloom bottom to top. All right, moving along. Again, I apologize. I'm trying to move quickly. Fruit functions. So their main function is to protect developing seeds. They also aid in the dispersal of mature seeds. And then just as a side note, fruit is also the fleshy part of the plant. Oftentimes it is what we eat, and it is what wildlife eat. It can be varied in color, form, size, texture. Fruit can be classified into 4 different types, either dry, fleshy, or dehiscent or indehiscent. So dry a good example of that is going to be like your pine cones. Fleshy is going to be like strawberries, your bananas. They're fleshy, squishy. Dehiscent means that they naturally will split open. Okay, so I often think of like a legume, where they will naturally, you'll see where they have a natural split. Indehiscent means that they don't naturally split. Sometimes fruit doesn't naturally split, and you actually have to crush it. Think about the nut, if you will. You have to crush nuts or an acorn, if you will. So a little bit of fruit morphology. Again, these are the parts of the fruit. We have the pericarp, we have the exocarp, and we have the mesocarp. So exocarp, I often think of exo or the outer part, meso being middle, and then pericarp is going to be the inner, the endocarp is going to be the inner part. And then we have a placenta. Okay, that's the part of the ovary to which the seed is actually attached to. And then we have the actual seed, and the seed develops inside of the fruit. Okay, that is a mature ovule. That seed has developed inside the fruit. So again, I'm using the best example. One of the best examples is going to be our peach. So the fuzzy part of the peach, that's the skin, that's the exocarp. Then we have the mesocarp. That's often the fleshy part, the part that we eat. Not that you can't eat the exocarp, but usually it's the fleshy part that we eat. And then we have the endocarp, okay, or the pit, if you will. And then, of course, we have our seed, okay. All right. Moving right along. Again, we can classify plants as either dry or fleshy. Dry fruits can be dehiscent or indehiscent. Remember, indehiscent do not naturally split open. Some good examples include an achene, so sunflower seeds. Samara, a good example of that is going to be our maples. They produce a samara. And then, of course, our nuts, acorns, nuts, like our oak trees, many of our other trees, they produce the nut. Dehiscent means that they naturally split open. So a capsule, a silique, a legume, or a follicle are examples. And again, they naturally will bust open or split open. And the reason for that splitting open is so that the seeds can usually be caught by the wind, or maybe caught in an animal's fur, and then it is spread. Fleshy fruits, some examples include a drupe. So that's a peach, or stone fruits. That's classified as a drupe. A berry, Tomatoes are actually a berry, because they are produced from one flower, and one fruit. Hesperidums are gonna be your lemons, your citrus. Plum, that's gonna be an apple and pear. And a pepo is a squash. Any of your cucurbit plants. So squash being a good example of that. Eggplant would be another. Fruit can be classified either as simple. So again, these are simple fruits. That means that they produce from one flower and from one ovary, or they can be compound. So that means that they produce from either a single ovary and multiple flowers, or they can have both multiple ovaries and multiple flowers. So there's a couple of types. Aggregate. One of the best examples is going to be a blackberry or strawberry, many of your aggregate fruits. And again, that means that they produce from a single, they'll produce from a single ovary, and they have multiple flowers. Multiple fruits, they are going to be produced from multiple ovaries or multiple pistils, aka the female part, and they produce multiple flowers. Mulberries, pineapples, and sycamores are a good example of that. Right, last but not least, we're going to finish up with roots, and I know I've gone way over time. Root functions, their functions are absorption of water and minerals. So again, they're bringing that to the plant. The other function is they anchor the plant in place. They conduct. So again, they're bringing in water and minerals, moving it up via the root system, via xylem. And then fourth function is they store water and carbohydrates. A little bit of root morphology, or those root parts. Primary root, also known as a taproot. Then we can have secondary roots. Those are often the fibrous root. Adventitious roots, those actually will arise from a stem or other part of the plant, not necessarily the root. And then we have little root hairs. Those are often little tiny outgrowths that will absorb little water and minerals very quickly. Little four root structures. So if you were to take a root and look at it underneath a microscope, this is what you have. Again, moving from bottom to top, you have the root cap. Okay. Then you have the region of cell elongation. So again, that's where that root is trying to stretch and move. And you have cellular division. Then you have region of maturation. So that's where the root is trying to grow larger. And then we have surface cells, the cortex, endodermis, and the vascular cylinder. So again, I know I'm moving very quickly, but if you were to take, again, looking at a fun lab would be to take actually a root and try to determine those parts of the root. There are two types of root systems. I've already mentioned that most of our monocots have a fibrous root system. Most fibrous roots are going to be shallowly rooted, so they don't go far into the soil. Oftentimes they're more susceptible to drought because they are more on the surface. They are not able to go deep into the soil to pull up water. However, they are quick to absorb many of our absorb irrigation water. So they're a great one for, we mentioned the erosion control, but also if you're, like I said, I moved here from California, great for absorbing a lot of rainwater and all those, any kind of moisture, any kind of surface moisture. They can respond quickly to fertilizer applications. And then again, they're most common in our monocots. Taproots, these are going to be deeply rooted. They're going to have that single primary root, goes much deeper into the soil. and enables the plant to obtain water and minerals from a deeper source, and is almost most common in dicots. Most all of our trees, many of our shrubs are all going to have a taproot system. All right, I'm going to stop there. Again, I apologize. I've gone a little bit over time. And I know I feel like I have jammed a lot of information into an hour and 40-minute lecture. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. Again, my email is mjf0007@auburn.edu. Cell phone number is 256-308-8830. I want to thank you all so much for having me this evening. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope that you'll invite me maybe for an in-person class. Hopefully we'll have an in-person class. I'd love to also do a lab for you guys, because this is a fun topic for me to teach on.
Thank you so much, Jayne. That was wonderful. I know you did cover a lot of material, but you covered it very well. And you know, I studied botany a long time ago, and it's great to just kind of get a refresher. And I'll also say the Alabama Master Naturalist program, there is a botany class there. This would be really great to add on to that. I don't know if you have connected with them or anything, but this would be a really great, because it's so in depth.